Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. Before I even start anything today, I just wanted to tell you that if you hear crickets chirping in the background, it is because our chameleon eats crickets. So she now has about 100 crickets in her cage with her, and usually the crickets are not loud, but this set of crickets will not stop chirping, and there's really nothing I can do about it. But anyway, today I wanted to show you some really interesting screenshots and an article that as parents we should be concerned about, because today's topic is they want your children and they're not hiding it. Okay, so I told you that I'm going to be showing you some screenshots. They're actually from a video that I can't share here on my channel just because of copyright issues, but I will leave the link in the description box. And I'm also going to be going over an article, just a snippet of it, even though the entire article really does need its own video in itself. And I don't know if I'll get to that or not, but I will be talking about a portion of that. But before I get into that and show those to you right off the bat, which is what I was going to do, is I thought that it would be helpful to give you some sort of a background in case you haven't been here before, or in case if you just kind of need a refresher course. I thought that it would be helpful to just talk about one thing that a lot of people don't understand about school. One of the main purposes of school is undermining the family. And I know people who are new to my channel and have never heard this before are probably thinking, what is she talking about? But if you actually study the history of school, there are lots of reasons that compulsory schooling began. Education was not one of them. Now, one thing that you need to understand is that many of the masterminds, the, men behind the beginning of compulsory schooling, they were utopian thinkers. They had this idea of a utopian society. And one common thread amongst utopian thinkers is that children are better off to one day be raised by the state rather than parents. In their minds, parents are more or less second-class citizens who don't properly raise children in the way that they should be. So who better to do that than the government? And in their minds, it is the government's problem to rear the children. And, this is something that really, you could almost see it right from the onset of compulsory schooling, just the sheer fact that they were being taken away from their families by law to be away from them for hours and hours every day. And one of the really troubling things is that, when that first started, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when that first started, children were only, compulsory school age was like from the age of maybe 9 to 11, I could be wrong, but it was only a period of like 2 years that kids had to be away from their parents and in school. And it was only like 12 weeks long versus the 36 weeks that we see today. But that was always something that the powers that be behind the whole onset of schooling had in mind, was they wanted to kind of break down that family unit so that the government could step in and take over and be more or less the caretakers of children in the future. And, if you've ever read Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, this is the theme, the plot of Brave New World. It's that it is taking place in a dystopian era, and children at this point are genetically engineered, and they are raised by a collectivist state. And, you're probably wondering why I'm bringing that up. You'll understand later. So just kind of push that in the back of your mind. But I want you to remember that about Brave New World. Now, you might be wondering, I mentioned a little bit, why do schools want to undermine the family? Besides, if you're not a utopian thinker, why would schools want to undermine the family? And see, another thing that you need to understand is that compulsory schooling is about control. It's about controlling the populace. It is about social engineering. And again, it has nothing to do with education. So the problem is that without the family, there's no stability, and it brings chaos. And people with no moral foundation, they are easier to manipulate, They are easier to control. And the people who are behind all of these things, the people who come up with, who more or less engineer the whole public education system, they know all of these things that, you know, the government likes to step in and pretend that it's saving everyone. That whole idea of creating order out of chaos. And so the thing is that people tend to forget that school is really just another arm of the government. It is another tentacle of the government. And so you have to think about this. I mentioned how, you know, kids go to school for longer than they used to. And now look at this. You know, I mentioned that kids who used to go to school maybe from like the ages of like 9 to 11, okay? And then it just started gradually getting longer and longer and longer. And that is exactly what we're seeing today. I live in Pennsylvania. The compulsory school age used to be from, I believe it was 8. Well, I know it was 8, unless you're in Philadelphia, then it was 6. But from 8 until I believe the age of 17. And what has happened is they just passed legislation, they just passed a new law that the new compulsory school age in Pennsylvania is now all the way down to 6, and it goes up through 18. They are stretching out the amount of time that children are legally required to be under these compulsory school laws. So on top of that, you know, I also mentioned that they only went for 12 weeks before, whereas now they go for 36 weeks. Now, before, like years ago, kindergarten was a new thing. And then it was pre-K was a new thing. But now you see people wanting to send their kids to even programs like early Head Start, when they're sending kids there who are like 2 or 3 years old. And that is, and if you don't know about Head Start, that is a government pre-K program. And what they are trying to do is they are trying to get children out of the clutches of their parents, and they want them to be raised, trained, instructed by the government instead. So they're going to continue stretching this longer and longer and longer until, before you know it, who knows, they might say, okay, as soon as your child can walk, they have to go to school. I'm speculating, I'm being a little facetious, but in a way it wouldn't surprise me anymore. These are the things that are happening. Then you have after school programs going on all the time where kids are in school for really, really long days. They come home. They are bogged down with hours and hours of homework, which if you watched my last video, I think I just published it on Friday. If you actually watch that, one of the reasons behind homework is what they call surveillance. It's kind of keeping children away from learning things from their family that the schools does not want them to. The schools want to occupy all of a child's time. What better way to do that than to not only keep them away from the family all day long, but to bring them home and to, you know, just give them all of this extra work to do, more things that will keep them away from their parents, learning things that the school doesn't particularly want the kids to know, because the schools want to have just an entire monopoly over what kids learn and understand nowadays, even when it comes to their morals. Schools want to develop all of those things, and they don't want any of these things in the hands of the parents anymore. So now, when I mentioned the homework, that actually comes out of the book, Dumbing Us Down, The Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling. That is by John Taylor Gatto, who was a former teacher, and he exposes the hidden curriculum of school. This is not something made up. You will find the hidden curriculum written about in even college sociology books. So he wasn't making this up. And yes, one of the last things in the hidden curriculum is surveillance. But now, just before I promise you I'm getting onto those screenshots now, I just want to share with you this quote to kind of put this all into perspective for you, so you can kind of get the gist of what I'm saying, and so that you can understand that this isn't just me, you know, some hysterical mom saying these things. I have been studying this for years now, and I came across this as I was rereading this book, The Underground History of American Education. I'm rereading this for the 3rd time now, and I get something new out of it every time that I read it. But this was actually written, this was from the first mission statement of Rockefeller's General Education Board. And this is from 1906. And if you don't know, the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller, was one of the main people behind the beginning of compulsory schooling. So this is from their mission statement. In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present educational conventions fade from our minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own good will upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning or men of science. We have not to raise up from among them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for embryo great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have ample supply. The task we set before ourselves is very simple. We will organize children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way. And with that, let's move on to the rest of this video. Okay, so what you see right now is from a video that someone sent to me over the weekend. And it is from the PSEA, the Pennsylvania State Education Association, my good old home state. And I want to remind you what I was speaking of before about the fact that one of the primary goals of the schools of compulsory schooling is undermining the family and bringing the parents down to more of a secondary position and elevating the state above the parents. Okay, so now what you're going to see here are some screenshots from this video, and I actually have the subtitles on so that you can see what it is that he was saying that I am specifically referring to. So what he was talking about was being a teacher and what goes on at graduation. And what he says is, at graduation, when they're walking across that stage and they come up to you and give you the big hug before mom and dad, that means that you're doing something right. And yeah, there it is. PSEA members are working together to educate our future. And I remember when I watched this video, I thought to myself, what? He is just coming out and he's so casual, so nonchalant about bragging that his students are coming to him before their parents to give him a big hug at graduation before their parents. And he says that means that he's doing something right. And this is not a good thing. Schools are supposed to be, well, in an ideal world, I shouldn't say they're supposed to be, because they're doing what they're supposed to do. In an ideal world, okay, schools would be supportive of the families, because children who are in supportive families will no doubt learn better. And if learning was the real reason behind school, then their support of the family would be there. However, it's not. Now, I'm not saying that this teacher here is nefarious and he knows all about this and everything. But what I'm saying is that he is comfortable enough to just come out and say that his students are more thankful to him than they are to their own parents. And he sees nothing wrong with that. And neither does the Pennsylvania State Education Association. They see nothing wrong with that. In fact, they are proud enough of this fact that they have it on their advertisements. This is in their video feed. They love the fact that he's saying that he's got students who come up and give him hugs before their parents, because that is one of the primary goals of school, is to undermine the family. Now, I'm going to move on next to the article in question, and I'm not going to talk about the whole thing. I'm actually going to just talk about one part of it today. And the reason that I'm talking about only one part of it today is because it actually fits right in with what I'm discussing here. Now, remember I told you to remember about Brave New World and how it was about children were being genetically engineered, and they weren't being raised by families. They were being raised in like a collectivist state, almost like in a factory. And this is the whole notion behind utopian style thinking. And there are people who think that this is the way things should be. And I should mention that there are, people in Common Core. They also, a lot of the people who are developing Common Core and who are behind that have this style of thinking. There was actually someone who was involved with Common Core who is on video saying that he would like to open up public boarding schools. And he said that it was for students who had like less than perfect home lives. And, to open up public schools and to have them be open 24 hours a day. And so that kids can actually, so that they could live there, not more or less live there, but they could actually live there. And you can't help but worry about those sorts of things, because you have to think, who decides what kids should live there? No child should be living in school. That is not up to the government. And what most people don't even understand is that the U.S. Department of Education is unconstitutional. It shouldn't even exist to begin with. But anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent, but let me just get back to Brave New World. One of the things about Brave New World that it says is that in Brave New World, people are not allowed to use the word mother and father. I think they're not even allowed to use the word parents. I'm not sure. I don't really remember. I've only read that book once. But mother and father were considered like taboo language. You were not supposed to say those words in Brave New World. And I want you to look at number 1. So this actually, I'll show you what this is. This is, it's a sex education curriculum that has been approved for Austin, despite parents, coming out and saying, absolutely, we don't want this. They don't care. Austin is doing this anyway. And I mentioned earlier that this whole thing really should have a video done on it, but I'm sure that there are other, channels who have already covered it. So what I'm really going to cover today is just number 1, because it fits right in with what I said. What does number 1 say? It says, some examples of the radical nature of this curriculum include prohibits kids from using the words mother and father to describe their parents. One resource in the curriculum advises students to not call the person who gave birth to them as their birth mother. And I remember when I was reading this, not to use the words mother and father, immediately Brave New World came to mind, because, that is a whole future video. My whole idea of Brave New World and what we are very quickly coming to, because, I probably should have looked this up before this video, but I'm kind of just saying this now off the top of my head, is that Aldous Huxley had some very interesting connections with his brothers. His brothers they were really involved. I believe it might have been in evolutionary thinking. You know what? I'm going to have to mention that in a new video, but Aldous Huxley knew what he was talking about. Just like I always say that George Orwell knew what he was talking about. He basically described exactly everything that's going on today. And I see that happening with Brave New World. The things that were written about in Brave New World, you can see our society headed in that direction today. And kids being prohibited from using the words mother and father, that's a red flag warning. So first you have a video of a teacher being proud of the fact that his students are coming up to him and hugging him at graduation before their parents. I mean, to me, that's just a slap in the face to parents. But yet he thinks it's okay, and the PSEA obviously thinks it's okay. And the reason that they think it's okay is because the family is to be undermined at all costs. And as you can see it here again in this curriculum, the same thing is happening. And so I'm pointing these things out to you because I think that a lot of times people see these things come up in the news, or they see these ads coming up and they kind of shake their heads at them. But if you look at them as a whole, you will really understand that, this is a red flag. We've got alarm bells going off right now. And if you have kids in school, you really, really need to think about whether that's the place that you want them to be. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed yet and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one over on Instagram, because YouTube always disables my comments. And if you like my work and would like to check out my Patreon page, I will leave a link in the description box for that as well. And I hope you have a great day.